A ceasefire is in place, people are still dying. That contradiction is the story of Lebanon right now, and it demands to be told honestly. To make sense of where things stand today, you have to rewind to February 2026, when the United States and Israel crossed a line that no one had publicly crossed before. They went to war directly with Iran, not through proxies, not through ambiguity. Open, declared warfare that culminated in something few would have predicted, the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Decades of Iranian power concentrated in a single figure, erased in a single night. And in the aftermath, every network Iran had built across the region began to move. Hezbollah moved first. If you're finding this level of analysis valuable, consider subscribing and hitting the like button. Channels like this one exist to go deeper than the daily headlines. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. It genuinely helps us understand who needs this kind of coverage most. Now back to Hezbollah. This is not a group you can understand by counting rockets, though the rockets matter. Rooted inside Lebanon for decades, it operates simultaneously as an armed force, a political party with parliamentary seats, a provider of schools and hospitals, and a funder of tens of thousands of Lebanese families. The United States designated it a terrorist organization in 1997. That designation still holds. But separating Hezbollah from Lebanon's civilian infrastructure is in any practical military sense nearly impossible. That reality shapes every decision made in this conflict, and every consequence that follows. When Iran's war began in earnest, Hezbollah activated sustained rocket barrages, not sporadic incidents, but hundreds of projectiles per day, striking northern Israel. Israel, fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously, concluded it could not absorb an open northern front indefinitely. So on March 16, 2026, 5 divisions of the Israel Defense Forces crossed into Lebanese territory. To put that in scale, this was not a targeted raid or a limited incursion. This was a full ground invasion, and no careful choice of language changes what that means for the people in its path. Israel's stated objective was to push Hezbollah north of the Litani River and establish a buffer zone that would remain under Israeli management until, as Defense Minister Israel Katz put it, the threat had been completely removed. Prime Minister Netanyahu's framing was starker. Whoever lays down their arms will save their life, he said. Whoever does not, their blood will be spilled. These are not the words of a government anticipating a short campaign with a negotiated exit. These are the words of a government that has decided to see something through. The military campaign that followed was rapid and brutal. Airstrikes struck Beirut, Tyre, Sidon, Nabatea, and the Bekaa Valley. The bridges over the Litani River were deliberately destroyed by Israeli forces, severing the south from the rest of Lebanon. Resupply routes cut, retreat routes cut, the battlefield sealed, and inside that sealed space, the fighting was relentless. Here is where the information environment around this conflict becomes as important as the physical events themselves. In the weeks following the ground invasion, viral posts began circulating across social media platforms claiming that hundreds of Israeli soldiers had been killed in massive Hezbollah counterattacks. These posts spread at scale, attached to videos and graphics that gave them the surface appearance of credibility. Millions of people encountered them. Many believed them. They were false. Verified reporting from the Times of Israel, Al Jazeera, NBC News, the Associated Press, and independent fact-checking organizations places the confirmed IDF death toll from this phase of the Lebanon war at between 13 and 15 soldiers. The deadliest single incident occurred on March 30th in the village of Beit Leaf, where 4 soldiers were killed in close-quarters combat. Captain Noam Madmoni, 22, from Stadrok. Staff Sergeant Ben Cohen, 21, from La Havim. Staff Sergeant Maxim Enton, 21, from Bat Yam. Staff Sergeant Gilad Harari, 4 young men, 4 families permanently changed. Not 400. Why does this matter? Because misinformation in an active conflict does not remain politically neutral. It inflames. It closes the psychological space where people might otherwise be capable of recognizing complexity. And in a war this layered and this fast-moving, a convincing post will always outpace a careful correction. What travels fastest in a crisis is almost never what is most accurate. The verified reality needs no embellishment. Lebanon's Ministry of Health has recorded more than 2,000 deaths and over 6,000 wounded since the country was pulled into this conflict on March 2nd. Civilians, children, elderly people with nowhere to go. Medical personnel who moved toward the danger because that is what they do and didn't return. April 8th stands apart from everything else. That morning, a ceasefire between Iran and the United States had just been announced. Hezbollah signaled it would pause operations. For a brief moment, the window that sometimes allows diplomacy to interrupt bloodshed appeared to open. Israel launched what it described as its most powerful strikes against Lebanon since the conflict began. The operation was called Operation Eternal Darkness. 50 Israeli Air Force jets, roughly 160 munitions, more than 100 targets hit within a 10-minute window. Strikes landed in southern Beirut, central Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, Tyre, not at the margins of the city. At its heart during morning rush hour in neighborhoods where people were simply moving through their day. Lebanese officials named it Black Wednesday. At a congested intersection in the Corniche al-Mazra neighborhood, a mixed residential and commercial area, Associated Press journalists reported seeing charred bodies in vehicles and on the street around them. The Lebanese Red Cross reported at least 300 killed or wounded in Beirut and its surroundings alone. Hospitals ran out of capacity. One NGO country director, speaking publicly from the scene, said the attacks were not targeted. "This is an open war crime," she stated. Israel's position was unambiguous. The IDF said it had struck Hezbollah command infrastructure, intelligence nodes, missile storage, Radwan force facilities, and aerial and naval units. It claimed at least 250 Hezbollah operatives killed. Israeli officials described the operation as necessary and decisive. A municipal official in one of the affected residential areas offered a different kind of accounting. "There is nothing here," he said. A funeral in the Bekaa Valley village of Shmustar was struck while mourners were gathered to bury someone. 10 of them were killed, 4 others wounded. 3 young girls died in the coastal town of Adlun, south of Sidon. Doctors Without Borders reported that its staff were injured by Israeli forces at Haram Hospital in Tyre and that the hospital sustained major structural damage. An ambulance was hit nearby. More than 20 countries condemned the strikes. The United Nations demanded accountability. A BBC analysis was unusually candid. The military gains from Operation Eternal Darkness were likely to be limited. Enormous human cost, potentially no decisive shift in the balance on the ground. That is the arithmetic of this kind of war, where one side controls the skies and the other has spent decades embedding itself inside the civilian landscape it simultaneously arms and serves. Hezbollah, for its part, fired an estimated 2,000 rockets into Israel during this phase of the conflict. Iron Dome intercepted most of them, not all. 1 Israeli civilian was killed, others were wounded. Border communities were evacuated and left largely empty. The experience of living under constant sirens, of knowing that any moment could be the one, accumulates over time in ways that statistics don't fully capture. In southern Lebanon, the town of Bint Jbeil became the center of sustained ground combat. Building by building, block by block, Israeli forces issued evacuation orders across wide areas of the south, directing residents to move north of the Litani River, and then, with the bridges already destroyed, many of those residents had no practical way to go anywhere. UNIFIL, the UN peacekeeping force that has operated in southern Lebanon for decades, found itself operationally stranded. 3 Ghanaian peacekeepers were wounded when Israeli missiles struck a battalion headquarters in Bint Jbeil. UNIFIL forces were caught in exchanges involving Hezbollah as well. The mission's mandate, maintaining peace in southern Lebanon, had been rendered meaningless by a conflict too large and too violent for any peacekeeping framework to contain. By mid-April, Lebanon's death toll had surpassed 2,000. The IDF reported striking more than 2,000 Hezbollah targets across the country. It claimed approximately 800 Hezbollah fighters killed, including significant numbers from the Radwan force. Whether those figures are accurate, whether they are inflated or understated, depends entirely on who you ask, and everyone in this conflict has strong reasons to manage the numbers they release to the world. On April 16, President Trump announced a 10-day truce between Israel and Lebanon. Almost immediately it began to fall apart. Israeli forces continued operations inside Lebanese territory. Strikes continued, people continued to die. Lebanese officials reported casualties on multiple days following the announcement. Hezbollah launched drones and rockets. Both sides accused the other of violations. Analysts who had been watching closely said what many suspected from the start. This may never have been a genuine cessation of hostilities. It may have been diplomatic positioning, a pause engineered to create negotiating space, not to actually stop the killing. Trump extended the ceasefire by 3 more weeks. The attacks continued. On April 25, Israeli strikes killed at least 4 people in the Nabatea district, north of the Litani, within the area technically covered by the ceasefire's stated terms. Al Jazeera correspondents reported ongoing bombardment in Qiyam. Israeli soldiers were reportedly demolishing structures in Bint Jbeil. A Hezbollah parliamentarian publicly declared the ceasefire meaningless. On April 26, a Hezbollah explosive drone struck near Israeli forces in southern Lebanon as they were evacuating wounded personnel. 1 Israeli soldier was killed. 6 others were wounded. Footage of the strike spread widely. That same day, Lebanese health officials reported 14 people killed by Israeli strikes, among them 2 women and 2 children. Netanyahu at his cabinet meeting stated that Hezbollah's conduct was dismantling the ceasefire and pledged a vigorous response. He was explicit that Israel retained what he called full freedom of action, not just to respond to attacks, but to preempt what he described as immediate and emerging threats. Read that carefully. Within the stated framework of a ceasefire, Israel has announced the right to strike whenever and wherever it judges necessary. That is a ceasefire in name. In practice, it is a war that has not stopped. Hezbollah rejected Netanyahu's framing entirely. Its parliamentarian Hassan Fadlallah called the Lebanese government's decision to engage in direct talks with Israel a violation of national law and the constitutional order. And on a Saturday afternoon in Beirut, thousands of Hezbollah supporters filled the streets, yellow flags raised, portraits of Hassan Nasrallah in their hands, chanting against any negotiation with Israel. One woman in that crowd said something that cuts to the center of the fracture running through this country. Whoever wants peace with Israel is not Lebanese. If you stayed until the end of this, you already understand why this kind of coverage matters. The mainstream narrative rarely holds this much at once. If you found this valuable, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Like the video so others can find it, share it with someone who's been trying to make sense of this, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your perspective from wherever you are in the world is part of this conversation too.